Welcome to Theory Hammer, my dear friends, where today we're going to take another look and discuss 10th edition Warhammer 40k. This is not going to be quite like my first video on this topic. That was more of a precursor video to compare older editions to 10th edition. I know, I still need to make my 9th edition video and complete that series, but you know, time is a thing. So thunderhammer the YouTube buttons, leave a comment, check out our other videos, and check out our other channel as well. I just want to get right into this and have a discussion, because 10th edition has some problems, some big problems. And what I want to do here is just discuss the problems. I want to discuss the problems, why I think they're problems, and if I can think of anything, give us some ideas on how we should address them. I'm going to try to keep the complaining to a minimum. I won't be addressing absolutely everything, like how flyers and Imperial Knights should be more playable or things like that. But now if you guys do think of anything that I do miss that is a glaring issue with 10th edition, let me know down in the comments and get that engagement going. And then at the end here, I'm going to just summarize all of the issues and all of the solutions that I can come up with. Starting with problem number 1. This game takes too long. I started playing back in 5th edition. We had like 2,000 point armies, or maybe they were 1850, but we had 2.5 hours to play, and I almost never ran out of time back then. Nowadays, I get to like turn 4, and we have like 15 minutes left for both people. So, oh, and by the way, games could go to like turn 7 back in 5th edition. So, when it's turn 4, and you have 30 minutes left for both people, that's 10th edition. Whereas you could have a 7-turn game with like 10 minutes left for both people. That was 5th edition. So let's see if we can maybe figure out the problem here, starting with deployment. Deploying units one at a time, it just takes way too long. Like, let me ask you something. Besides, I think probably infiltrators, does where your opponent put something ever cause you to put something else down, like in a place where you didn't expect to already put it? Probably no. 10th edition also has standardized terrain, so this means that you can kind of plan around the terrain and the deployment, and so you almost never care where your opponent puts their stuff. You kind of just always ask them, like, how fast can your scary thing over there move, and so you just pre-measure it, and you stay behind that line. Your scary stuff's always hidden, and so is your opponent's stuff. So it's not like you're really counter-deploying anymore, you're both just hiding. And the idea of dropping them one at a time is just a waste of time. Dropping all at once does give a positioning advantage to the person going second, but again, it's not really so much in 10th edition where you kind of just know where your stuff's going to be anyway. Plus, you can't choose on the turn roll, like on the dice roll, so you can't really like counter deploy me too much, and we're already counter deploying each other anyway. And then when you do have to go first, it's like, okay, whoops, if you tried to like somehow counter deploy me, well, now you have to go first, so it's not really a thing. In other editions, when the roll-off happened, you could choose, and so you could just entirely counter-deploy, win the roll-off, and then just tell your opponent, oh yeah, you can go first, and it just completely wasted their first turn. But you can't really do that as much anymore, and so there's less of an incentive to counter-deploy. I mean, like I said, you're always hiding anyway, and so is your opponent as well, since they also don't know who's going first, and neither do you. And so I think that problem is pretty simple, like the solution at least. I deploy everything, you deploy everything. It changes almost nothing. I think that you may have to alternate placing units that can be deployed outside of your deployment zone, but like after that, just drop everything. It'd probably save you like 10 minutes between both players, maybe like 5 or so for each person. The other solution, which is more of a practical solution, is to just put your stuff down as if you're dropping it all at once and just say, here it is, when it comes back to you to put something down. The problem there is it kind of messes with the clock a little bit. Like, I don't think it's technically illegal. It probably actually technically is illegal, but like no one would care. And it just kind of seems like bad sportsman or something like that to do. And so a lot of us do something similar where we'll have like our next unit ready to go as soon as the opponent puts something down. But the only reason we do that is because of the clock, because it takes so damn long to deploy anything. And then you compound this with the next problem, which just takes more time to do, which is rerolls. And I love rerolls. I love them to death. But yeah, like there's too many of them in 10th edition, so many things give them out. Characters will give them to units. Marines have Oath of the Moment. Like Chaos can get it now with one of their detachments. There's probably too many to list, to be honest. this doubles the amount of time it takes to roll a specific thing. And then if you add in things like sustained hits or lethal hits or both, that just adds more dice to the roll, if we're talking like sustained hits. And so it just like increases the amount of wounds you have to roll, which takes more time technically, and then it increases the number of saves the opponent has to take. And I'm pretty sure just about every army has access to some form of rerolls. Not literally every army, but a lot of the armies have access to full rerolls or reroll ones or reroll something. And while a little bit of it is okay, I just think that there's too much of it. And then the next thing that we have, which is an issue, takes a lot of time, are reactionary actions. So this is things like reactive moves or things like reactive shoots. A reaction of some kind that makes you roll dice or have to measure and then move. This takes a couple of minutes to do sometimes. Like, let's say you hit my Votann Terminators with a pretty good shooting attack, and you kill like 3 or 4 of them. Well, now I can shoot back at you for 2 CP, and in case you guys didn't know, rolling all that out is going to take a minute or 2 to resolve. Like, if you only kill 3, that's 7d6 blast shots shooting back at you. So you roll it, you add it up, you add in your blast, you roll it, you collect them, you roll a wound, your opponent takes saves, the opponent removes their models, and then I have my other gun to shoot. Like, it can just take a good amount of time to do some of these reactionary actions sometimes. And that's kind of an extreme example, and a lot of the time, like, reactive shoots don't even happen because people would rather just not even shoot you than be shot back at, unless they're like really confident that they're going to destroy the unit in one activation. And there's some other examples of this as well, and things like moves, like surge moves. Sometimes they'll take just a minute if you have like a big unit of accursed cultists, which you probably won't see very many of these anymore, but that's like 20 guys. So now you have to move 20 guys, like, and place them where you want them, and that requires having to think, which can take a little while. And so it's just more time that's being added to the game. And then you have things like redeploys, which, you guys believe it or not, this wasn't something that you could do before. Like, there were certain things, like Eldar had their redeploys a little bit, yeah, that was a thing. But Tau are the original guys who had it. But 9th edition's really where it started, when you have, like, units that are able to do stuff like that a lot, and it happens all the time in 10th edition. A lot of 10th edition things started in 9th edition, kind of like the game being awful, but that's one of them, is these redeploy things. Being able to redeploy takes time. Let's say I have 3 units of scouts that can all reposition every single turn. Yeah, that's going to take a good 5 to 10 minutes when you put it like all together for every turn. You gotta walk over and you gotta pick up the models, you gotta put them aside, you then have to measure, like, where you want to put them, you then have to physically replace them, put them down on the table, and then you have to do it with 2 to 3 units. So, things like scouts or Votann bikes or swooping hawks, death marks if you're playing the hypercrypt, the whole Grey Knight army practically, that sort of stuff just takes extra time. And even when it's only a couple of units having to do this like 3 to 4 times a game, that adds up a lot. Like, think of it. Say it takes you a minute to pick up a unit, move off this to the side, measure again, and then put it back down. Realistically, it might take you less time, like 30 seconds if you're maybe like rushing and considering time and that sort of thing. But if you aren't playing on hardcore mode, it might take you a minute, And maybe you aren't exactly sure where you want them in the case of scouts coming up off the table at the end of your opponent's turn, but you know that you don't want them where they are, and so you kind of have to spend a minute or 2 thinking about where you want to put them when you bring them back down. And then you got to measure, and then you got to put them down, and then you got to do the same thing with the next unit. That adds up. That's going to be a good 5 to 10 minutes, like I said. And so you have all these little compounding activities that kind of just make the game drag on. And a lot of these things just take more brain power as well. It's not only like a longer game, it's a longer game where you had to think harder because there's so much more unpredictability now, like getting secondaries, predicting the strats that your opponent's going to use, things like that. I'll talk about it more in a second, but the game just takes fucking forever now, dude. And so I think the next main issue with 40k is the unpredictability. There's just too much of it. There's too much, I don't know what my opponent is going to do, and there's too much, I don't know what's going to happen. Generals in real life have battle plans, and they probably have backups to those battle plans, but there's there's a measurement of predictability with that, and the same thing with secondary objectives. Like, you don't necessarily know what your enemy's battle plan is going to be, but their battle plan isn't going to be, we're just going to wing it and just do completely random, unpredictable things. And so kind of jumping back to the idea of reactions, like reactive actions and unpredictability and brain power and such, this works really well in a small scale situation, like in a skirmish type game. But in a game with as many models as 40k, I think it's okay to have things be more predictable in some sense. I like reactive things, like Armor of Contempt, because it's just a buff that happens. You know, you don't have to move, you don't have to roll any dice, or any of that shit. You can just basically cast this instant, my creature gains indestructible until end of turn. Things like that are fine, but reactive moves, reactive shoots, other reactive things, and the unpredictability of the secondaries kind of just way too much on the brain. In a small scale skirmish game, local objectives and such could change on the fly. But in like a larger scale battle like 40k is supposed to represent, at least at 2,000 points, the overall objective in reality wouldn't really change all that much. You're here to do a thing, you're not here to do like 50 different things, and that kind of brings me to a tangent thing. And I want to know if any of this resonates with any of you guys, but it's that secondaries are just, they're just kind of fucking boring and a bit immersion breaking. Like, I don't like that they're random, but they exist, and so since they exist and things are what they are, you know, you can't change what is, the actual secondaries themselves kind of just suck. Like, you have containment, okay, have units on the sides of the tables that just exist for your turn. Got recover assets, have a unit that just exists in no man's land and just exists in your deployment zone. Things like sabotage are kind of lame too, like just touch a piece of terrain and to just have your unit exist. Like, there's just nothing interesting about doing an action. Your unit just exists and you get points. Boring. So this is just a little me issue here, and I promise there won't be more of these, at least I don't think. But I do want to know what you guys think. Does that resonate with anyone? I feel like action should be, I don't know, cool. Like, you got sabotage? Okay. That piece of terrain there gets removed at the start of my next command phase. So like it works that way, where you have to touch the terrain and like they have to survive there. And it gets removed at the start of my next command phase, and you get points for it. Any enemy models that are in the terrain when it gets removed, like take D6 mortal wounds or something, and then they disembark from any part of the terrain as if it were a transport. Like, how cool would that be, dude? Yeah, like my unit did nothing and had to survive, but I did force you to move out of the terrain and take a bunch of mortal wounds. And so it would just be cool if they had a little bit more like pizzazz to them, instead of just my unit is somewhere and I get points. Like, it's just so boring. But games otherwise are about unpredictability. So, you know, there wouldn't be games if they didn't have that. But you also need, like, a fair balance of predictability and unpredictability. I have very little agency over the game in 40k. My dice are random, like, obviously hits and wounds and saves, but also, like, my advance rolls are random, my charge rolls are random, my cards are random, my opponent's moves are random, and their dice are random, and their cards are random. The only thing I have any agency over is moving things around the table. And now I'm forced to actually move them towards objectives, so I have even less agency over that than I used to. You do still have complete agency over deployment, but yeah, I mean, most of the game is just entirely fucking random. And the unpredictability of 10th edition is, I would argue, a bad thing. But the way to fix this, I think, is to make all secondaries fixed, and just change how obviously you need to change how they work, or how they're worded, or both, but maybe like make it pick 3, each of them's worth 20 points, make the primary maxed at 40 for 100 total, delete the extra 10 points for paint because it's stupid, and then that's going to be your max 100 points there. And then separately, I think things like reactive moves and shoots and stuff like that just shouldn't exist. That's the solution there, is to just get rid of them. It's kind of just bullshit when you like something charges you and then you fall back and then it just gets to mist away. Or you fall back and then you shoot at it and then it gets to surge move back into combat. And I've been on both ends of this. I've done these things to people. I've had these things done to me. These reactive actions and their unpredictability, along with the unpredictability in the cards, It's just too much unpredictability for a game with as many models as 40k has. And so we are going to now move on to another issue though, which is that the rules change too much. And this shouldn't be an issue objectively, but when we look at the effects, it is. And it is because of the frequency. And I'm just going to start this portion of this off by saying, this is a hard problem to solve. It's not simple at all. It's complicated because there are so many moving parts. So let's break this down just to understand why this is an issue, why rules changing and being updated and points changing and that thing is becoming an issue. It's something that I've touched on before, but they're just updated too often, plain and simple. And I'm not the only person decrying this problem. And I want to approach this with nuance rather than just complaining like I normally do. And so I think most people would agree that the game needs to be balanced and that GW needs to pay attention to what's too strong and what's too weak. But we got to look at the problem from the outside. This game is a freak of nature with way too many units. It's starting to suffer from the same thing that like Magic the Gathering is. There's just too many variables to consider when it comes to balance because there's just too many models and too many units. Magic kind of solves this problem by having different formats where cards may or may not be legal, but 40k doesn't have that. And I'm not sure that I would even want it or what it would look like, but this problem is just so goddamn frustrating because all of us want the game to be balanced, but we also don't want the rules and the points to be changing constantly. It's bad for customers that are invested because it keeps them in this hamster wheel, and it's too much for the average tournament goer. And I'd love to offer you a solution here, but I'm not sure I really have one. The game is too big to balance anymore. Now I say that while also recognizing that the game is very balanced right now compared to other editions. It really is. It's in a good spot. Codex creep has actually been kept to a minimum, I would say, this edition. Like a codex may be busted at release, but then the points are nerfed or, things are errated, and so it isn't much of an issue anymore. It's always funny because there's always one insane codex and then one terrible one. And they always have to rein in the one that's ridiculous and then buff the other one. It's just, it's so ridiculous. But I said no complaining. So this game's in a good spot, balance-wise, for the most part. But, at what point do we say, like, this is good enough? And then kind of just adjust to the things that are still a bit too strong. And I mean just a little bit too strong. At that point, it's kind of like, all right, this is okay. This is better than it should be, but, probably, 5 or 10 points undercosted, something like that. Rules changes are a great way to keep people invested, by one token, because people want and need balance for the game to be successful and fun, frankly. You want to feel like you're on a level playing field, but by the same token, rules changes are also a way to alienate your customers, like is what's happening now. And if I'm just getting into competitive play, can you imagine how insane it would be for me to keep up with all the rules changes all the times? If you play competitively, isn't it a bit frustrating that you can't ever kind of settle and master a single list anymore? And for all of us, I would think it's a bit frustrating that because we love the game, we're kind of more or less forced to buy new models rather than deciding to. And I'm just not sure how to solve this problem. And for those of you who do not know, I've been developing my own tabletop game for the last several years, and when I get big and strong, I'll take it to production. But yeah, I had to playtest it myself, and balancing things is just really difficult. If you write something and you say oh, that's fine, but then you see its interaction in practice, on the table, and then you go, oh, that's not fine, it's a hard problem to solve. It really is, and I don't think it's a problem that can be solved. I think that because of the state of the game and just how things are, the rules updates happening so quickly is necessary. I hate it, but I recognize that it's needed. But overall, it just can't be fixed because there's just so many variables and we have new things being released as well. Every single new unit has the potential to have some sort of ripple effect of some kind. You can have everything perfectly balanced and then release some, new unit for a new faction, and now that faction's win rate goes to 60%. And then due to those builds, you have factions like X, Y, and Z that change their builds to help counter it. And then some find some good counters, their win rates will go up, and then also The original faction will go down maybe to like 55%. Well, we had it all balanced before we added this new unit. So now what we gotta do is nerf that new unit, and then probably the unit that it combos with, because, you know, GW just does that without understanding the ramifications, like without fail, every single time. And we also had to nerf those counter units from those other factions that started having higher win rates. And we also had to buff the units from the factions that couldn't find counters. So now, the original and the counter factions, both their win rates go down, and the buff ones might go up. And it's just a fucked problem, dude. And I don't think you can solve it. Like, I don't think you can solve it when new units come out and when the rules themselves change every 3 to 4 years. I do not think this issue can possibly be solved, and I really hate to say it, and I mean that sincerely. I wish there was a way to solve this, but I guess the only way that I could see this being solved is by releasing everything at once. But that's just something that we'll touch on later. But I think that could be the only solution because of how big the game is. But we will touch on that later. We're first going to move on to another issue, which is the rules inconsistencies. Games Workshop has tried to standardize things in this edition, and a lot of things have been standardized. Like, you have keywords for anti-infantry, sustained 1, things like that, and they used to have keywords in other editions, like in older editions. But in this edition, they forgot to standardize, like, literally everything except for weapon keywords. Like, why isn't a reactive move just a keyword? That always works the same way. Not like, you know, that's just always a D6. It's not like sometimes a 6 and sometimes a D6. Why does your unit get to move 6 when mine only gets to move D6? And why is your unit able to use its surge move to get into combat, but mine is not? And I spent a CP to do my surge move, and yours is on a datasheet? Like, and better than mine? Sure, sounds good. Now, I know surge moves pretty much did become a keyword, like literally a week ago or something, depending on when this comes out. But the point is the same, that a lot of these abilities are very inconsistent instead of just being standardized into a keyword. And I could literally spend hours talking about this because there are so many of these, and while it admittedly kind of is a small issue, it just compounds with others. Like, I play a ton of factions. Sometimes I can't remember if my thing is D6 or if it's just flat 6 and I have to look it up. Sometimes I can't remember if I can get into combat with it or not because I don't remember if it's called a normal move or if it's called a surge move, like on its thing, and so they're technically different. There's just too much inconsistency. And this causes like rules disputes as well. Like, is that a normal move? Is that a non-normal move? And it just leaves open space for people to get it wrong, frankly, or to like bend the rules if somebody doesn't know. It's like, oh yeah, I got this reactive move here. It's 6 inches. I'd probably just be like, okay, cool. Like, I legit like wouldn't question them if they try to cheat me on that, because sometimes it is 6 inches and sometimes it's not. And this is an easy issue to solve. You hit Control-C and then Control-V. That's copy and then paste on a keyboard if you're using like any modern computer. So that's pretty easy, and that's it. You just make them all the same. All these similar abilities that we see throughout different factions, you make them all the same. Reactive moves, reactive shoots, everything that's the same like that, just make it the same. And now kind of adjacent to that is the next issue, which is the rules bloat. And I'm not gonna spend too much time on this, I don't think, but at this stage, we have 13 books that have come out. That's 13 codexes, and out of the 13 codexes, there's 64 detachments. That's 256 enhancements, which is also a 384? Yeah, 384 stratagems, all of which do inconsistent things, and it just becomes too much for someone to remember. Unless you're like playing on impossible mode where you have your PhD, then you couldn't remember it all. But that isn't easy, and I can guarantee you that even like the top players don't know every rule, every enhancement, and every strat of every army. They will regularly admit it on their own shows. Somebody will say, oh yeah, this enhancement, and the other person's like, I literally have no idea what that is. And it's because there's just too many things to know, and generally speaking, you're gonna remember the ones that are good and not the ones that are bad. So we have 256 enhancements, 64 detachments, 384 strats, and we're only halfway there. We then have a datasheet rule on each and every unit, and sometimes they have more than one. plus things like their keywords, but individually speaking, like individual codex speaking, this is fine. Knowing your own datasheets and your own units isn't really all that hard, but when you want to play competitively, you should know your opponent's datasheets as well, and their army rule, their detachments, pretty much everything, so you can be prepared for what they have. When your opponent's army is getting a codex, and now there's even more rules, it can be hard to keep pace and consider absolutely everything, and it kind of gets back to that unpredictability problem. There starts to become too much to consider and to remember, and it can be hard to make smart decisions in that state of mind. And it's related slightly to another problem that we'll touch on in a second. But if everyone got a new codex at the same time, and everything was updated, and people really had time to kind of like hunker down for a few years and play with the same rules, then I think this problem kind of works itself out, because it exists no matter what, right? So a new player will still come in, in theory, but they still have a shitload of things they need to learn if they want to be competitive. The difference is that once they learn it all, it won't change. And I think that's the way that you fix this, just by setting that precedent. Release every faction's codex at the same time. Then you set the precedent on like the volume of rules and such that may or may not need to be learned depending on how you want to play the game. And there's other ways to keep people interested as well, because that's a big part of this rules changing all the time, is to keep people interested basically, and to have people continually buying such. But there's other ways to do it, like having new formats. You still want to have like a release trickle of models for factions and such, but leaving that kind of stuff aside, I think this is the way that you just get through the rules bloat. You just say, here are all the things, and this is what you get. But in order for this to work, the overall rules have to remain the same, which we're going to get to. But first, we have one other issue with the rules, which is that they're becoming more and more paywalled. So when 10th edition first came out, all the indexes, all the rules, all of it was free, which was super cool. This was awesome. Each time a new codex has come out though, those rules have been paywalled in the app. So as time goes on, the app actually becomes less and less usable for people. So like when I'm playing Votann, who are like the last to get their codex, and you're playing Space Marines, one of the, if not the, most popular faction, which got their codex first, that's cool, because I can't actually look at your datasheets unless I pay GW money. But you can look at mine for free. And so the solution there is super duper simple. You just make it all free. Make all the rules for everything free. Charge for the models, of course, but make those rules free, brother. And I don't mind the physical codex existing and costing money. They're all filled with like amazing pictures and awesome lore, and I actually love having them, to be honest. I use the app all the time. It's super convenient, and it makes it so, I have to take less stuff with me to tournaments, but I also do like having that physical codex at home. It looks nice on my shelf, and all that. So the issue is more that this just punishes people who don't spend as much money with Games Workshop. It's honestly kind of just shitty, and has a really simple solution. And I think people who want the physical codex will get it anyway, even if it's free on the app. People like me. And then the last thing we're going to talk about here isn't exclusive to 10th edition, but is exacerbated from it. The biggest problem that plagues this game, it is the rules turnover. And this issue kind of is interwoven with all the rest. This is the main issue with the Warhammer 40k in general. The fact that the rules never remain the same. It just exacerbates every other mentioned issue. And dude, we have 26 factions or whatever. Like, GW has to restart the balance exercise every single edition. They have to restart the codex design process every single edition. Core rules change every 3-4 years or so. It just kind of depends. It's never been like a set in stone thing, but frankly, I just fucking hate this. It's something that I've had to deal with since I started playing, and it's like it's like one of the main reasons I started developing my own game. I was like, what if a Warhammer type game didn't suck and had rules that didn't change? And another game that I play is Magic, which is pretty obvious from a lot of the references that I make to it. Now, leaving Wizards' recent insane behavior aside, that game did it right. They came up with a set of core rules, and they didn't change them, other than like improving the things that were there or slightly rewriting things to be more clear. Like, the mechanics of that game are the same and have been the same basically since inception. And so it kind of gives us like this weird existential issue. If you really think about it, like if we have 26 factions, if we update every faction each month, we can update 12 factions a year. And so we can update everything and we can roll over the core rules within 3 years. But if we take it a little bit further, there's the possibility that we end up with 2 new factions in the next year. Those being like Emperor's Children, maybe Dark Mechanicum, and I know that we're supposed to get some Deathwatch stuff that's coming, but we don't really know, how extensive that would be. Who knows, maybe at some point Harlequins would get another codex again. Either way, it brings us more and more factions every time, and when you're rolling over the edition every 3 years, once you start having so many factions, you literally can't. That's a little way off, but we start becoming this thing where we have so many things, we have so many factions, where you literally have to do one a month for 3 years if you want your edition to be 3 years long, or you have to extend how long your editions last. Since I started playing in 5th edition, this is a list of factions that I know have been released that didn't exist when I first started. Now, I did technically start playing in 4th, maybe actually in 3rd, but like 4th is where I started playing, 5th is when I started going to tournaments. Either way, Imperial Knights, Grey Knights, Gene Stealers, Sororitas, Custodes, Admech, Death Guard, World Eaters, Thousand Suns, Chaos Knights, and Votan. And I'm probably missing some there. Like, these things had units they were like in other codexes, but you couldn't play them as their own like codex. At least, I don't think. Grey Knights might have had a codex before, and maybe Thousand Suns, but the rest of them I don't think had any codex before. But like, yeah, if we have that many factions and only 3 to 4 years to update them, there's always kind of like a crunch at the end, because you have to roll it over. Like, Guard got to use their codex for about 5 minutes before 10th edition came out. The last army to get their codex always has that issue too, especially if the faction sucked throughout the edition. And now, the entire edition changed, and you may or may not have something good. It's just a feels bad moment, and it's due to the fact that we have these rules turnovers just every few years. And my solution here is very simple, which is just don't. Don't do it. Leave it the same. Find something simple and great, like 8th edition, codify it into Imperial law. If you do this, like half of my solutions can kind of just fall into place. Codexes can be released all at once, and maybe they just do that every 3 years. Just release all the codexes, new codexes every 3 years, but all at once. That could keep people interested. Just mass release them all for free. Boom. They're free. That solves my first issue. And then they're also eliminating bloat, so boom, eliminates issue 2. Because it's like, here's all your codexes. This is the volume of rules that you're going to be working with to play this game. They're all just here right now. And if you release them all at once, you only need to do a few rounds of updates, like 1 to hit the egregious things, 1 to hit the stuff that floats to the surface, and then maybe a 3rd if you really need it. So like 1 at the 3-month mark, 1 at the 6-month mark, 1 at the 9-month mark, and then the rest of the time we just figure it out as the players, because with everything's just released, so it's and been balanced at that point. So now we can kind of just settle with it. And we know what everything is and what everything does, and we know it's not going to change other than, new units that might come out or something like that. And so we can kind of go, okay, this is what we got. Let's build our list. Like, let's work with this. And so to summarize it all, we need to have a rule set that stays the same. This is how we eliminate rules needing to be changed constantly and things needing to be balanced constantly. This makes it so you can release codexes all at once, and releasing the codexes all at once makes balancing things easier and faster, and that eliminates that rules bloat. There's no like conditioning you to have less rules and then giving you more, or having you feel like you always need to learn new things that are coming out. You just get it all at once. You learn it, the end. Things also need to be free. None of your rules should ever be paywalled. That is insane. You should print your beautiful special edition codexes and sell them to people like me who want to buy them. And then once we get like a good, 2-3 years with the same rules and the same codexes, then maybe think about changing the codexes, but do it again all at once. Or don't, like do it every 5 years or longer. and instead do things like Pariah Nexus to keep people interested, or other thematic things that are still a good way to get people into the game. And that's a great way to keep things kind of interesting for the players. And if they did that more often, like every 3 months, I could see that being pretty profitable for them, because now you're changing your list due to like the missions as opposed to the rules and the points having to change constantly. But they might change because of the missions, because they might incentivize different kinds of things, like how we see battle line keywords on a lot of things in Pariah Nexus. And then separately from those issues, the game does take too fucking long. Get rid of reactive actions, make the deployment one step, make things have less rerolls and give things more like pluses to hit instead. Make the rules consistent and concise. If I can surge move 6 end into combat, then so can you. And if I can shoot back, like it's always after a model's destroyed, or some kind of consistency there. And then just get rid of redeploys. There needs to be some more predictability. Make primaries and secondary missions always fixed choices. Make them hard to achieve, but make them choices that you have agency over choosing, and then make them do something cool, for Christ's sake. So, 10th edition is unfortunately riddled with issues, and I'm not even counting the ones in the game, but I think we have to have a clear understanding of those issues in order to even begin to approach how to fix them. Not that we're going to fix them. If we are going to fix them, though, these are some of the things that I'd probably do if I had no input from the outside world. With input from the outside world, I'm sure, like I'm positive, we could find much better ideas as well. When you love something so much, you just want it to be better, you know? What do you guys and gals think? Tell me down below, and of course, thunderhammer that subscribe button, and like button, and Nurgle's bell, and check out other videos, check out our other channel. I'm currently in the process of making a Dawn of War Let's Play, so if you're feeling Space Marine-y or something, you should go check that out. So, thanks as always, guys, for watching. I'll catch you theorists back in the lab. 10th edition sucks so fucking much.